Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andy Stevenson. I'm the chair of the North East region of the IMechE, and I'd like to welcome you to our second professional development session titled Tips for a Successful CEng or IEng Interview. So we've got two speakers today, Denis Healy, our Regional Business Development Manager, and Ian Mearns, an interview facilitator with the IMechE. Ian's got experience in conducting over 500 professional interviews for the IMechE, so his thoughts will be really interesting to hear in terms of best practices. We have a few upcoming events, a real event on the 17th of November, and our third PDP talk regarding career learning and how to use that to apply for CEng or IEng status. And then we've got some further development events planned for December and then into the early new year. So look out for emails and the IMechE Near You website for details of those. If you'd like to ask any questions during the presentation, then please use the Q&A function and we'll run through those questions, putting them to Denis and Ian at the end of the presentations. So I will now hand you over to Denis and let you fire away.
Well, thanks very much, Andy, and welcome everybody. There's a lot of you here, I'm pleased to say. Good response to this. And it's about preparation for interview. A little bit of logistics. We're going to run this session. We'll complete it by about 6 o'clock. And as Andy alluded to a minute ago, we've got Ian Mearns on the call. Now, Ian, great experience. He's an interview facilitator of the IMechE. Now, what that basically means is that when you have your interview, there's a couple of people who actually conduct the interview. There's the interview chairman and there's a co-panelist. And what we have then is the facilitator, and that person's job is to make sure that everything runs according to plan. The interview assessors are volunteers. But the interview facilitators put there by the IMechE to make sure that everything works well and everything's properly done. And Ian is our North East region facilitator. As Andy said, he's done 500 or so interviews, so there's not much that this guy doesn't know about how to behave and respond and what to do at a CEng or IEng interview. He's certainly been to a lot more interviews than I have. So we will be calling on Ian slightly later to go through, his experiences. And please use the chat function to ask questions because Andy's going to be sort of keeping an eye on them. We're going to do that sort of a bit of a forum at the end, but there's no reason if you think of a question why you shouldn't put it in the chat box as we go, and we'll deal with all the questions then at the end. So I'm kind of making a bit of an assumption here that many of you are interested in applying for CEng or IEng. That's what we're really talking about here, because those are the two levels that require an interview. But if we're talking about preparing for interview, then obviously we're not just talking about what happens on the day itself. Now, we will talk about what happens on the day itself. And it's quite an interesting subject because, of course, what happens on the day itself has changed in view of the COVID-19 restrictions that we're having to live with, which means that all our interviews are now conducted online using Microsoft Teams. And we had our last face-to-face interview back in March. And then there was a period of several weeks where no interviews took place because IMechE was working out how we could transition to this new online process. And that wasn't straightforward because obviously there's all sorts of technicalities that had to be gone through, and how do you ensure consistency, and had to be approved by the Engineering Council and all of that. Sort of thing. So it did take a few weeks to sort it out, but once we got to about late summer, I think it was about early July, we started doing things online. We're trying to make the whole thing as like it was before as possible. But anyway, we'll come on to that a bit more detail soon. But I want to rewind before that, because if we're talking about preparing for an interview, then we have to talk about what comes before the interview and how to write a good application, because it's your application that goes to the interview assessors. So what I want to look at today is the application form, because the assessment takes the form of a combination of the application form and the interview. So the interviewers will receive your documentation, your application form, usually a couple of weeks beforehand, and they'll have an opportunity to go through it and think in their own minds about what sort of questions they want to ask you. And a very important point is that all the questions that they ask you will be based on what you've written on your application form, about the projects that you have described there. So it's not like going for a job interview where the HR department or interviewing would ask probably everybody the same question, set of questions to ensure consistency across all the candidates. With this, it's different because everybody will have written about different things. And what they're interested in is your projects, the projects that you describe in your application form, which give evidence of you meeting the competencies. That's what they will want to drill into. And what we want to do is to make it as straightforward and seamless for you at the interview as it's possible to be. So in this session, we're going to be looking at the application form. I'm going to give you some general tips about completing the application form, because this is the document that is going to be in front of the assessors. They will make their impressions about you based on this. And we will look at each of the 5 competencies and the form itself, and look at some sort of tips and examples for you on that one. So just a little bit of I suppose revision. I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but in order to apply, you need underpinning knowledge and understanding to a particular level, which is CEng in the case of, which is MEng in the case of chartered engineer, and BEng in the case of incorporated engineer. And assuming you've got your knowledge and understanding, and assuming you've had at least 4 years experience post-graduation, and you've got your qualifications all ticked off, you are ready for what we call professional review. And professional review is a combination of the written application form working in tandem with the professional review interview. So what we're really looking at today is professional review. And it starts with this application form. Now this application form is all online. You'll find it at imeche.org/application. And you can go into the CEng drill down or the IEng drill down. And basically there's 5 sections to this form. And these are the 5 sections. And I just want to briefly run through each of them. The first one is about you. So this is where you put your sort of basic details on there, your personal details. And then there's this sort of summary of responsibilities. So a potted career history of you. What have you done? What have you achieved? Especially over the last 5 years. That's what we're particularly interested in. And you've got 600 words there. So it's like a sort of potted career history that you put on there. And then the heart of the application is the competence statements. And the competence statements is where you give evidence about how you meet the competencies. And what is competence? Well, the ability to perform an activity correctly, safely, effectively, and consistently. And how do you get it? Well, principally, it's about doing the day job as an engineer. It's about the projects, the products, the activity, the design, the things on the right there, especially that 3rd bullet point down. We want to know about projects that you do. And there are 5 UK spec competencies. And I just want to touch briefly on each of them today. Because this is what the application is about, and that's what the interview is about. So the interview is looking at, are you competent in line with the Engineering Council's competencies? So that is why these competencies are so important. And I want to have a look at them all. The first 2 are what we call the technical competencies. So the first one is about how you are optimizing knowledge and understanding, how you're taking that knowledge and understanding and optimizing it and applying it. So it's about engineering knowledge. The second one's about practical application. And then you're into the softer skills, leadership, communication, and personal conduct. And what happens essentially is that at your interview, you will be assigned a score against each of these 5 competencies. And I'm not going to go into any great detail here about what you need to get in each competence to get what score, but there is a detailed matrix. We've got some guidance notes which you will find at that application link I just gave you, IMechE.org/application. And if you do a bit of scrolling around there, you'll see something that says that guidance notes. And in there, buried in there somewhere, there is a matrix which talks about each of the competencies. But in essence, if you're applying, you should be sort of looking, this is the CEng at what we'd say level 3, where you're going to have fairly significant responsibility and autonomy, maybe overseeing the work of others. And that's the sort of level that people would expect to be at the CEng, although the pass mark is 3 3s and 2 2s. So there is a little bit of room for slippage to a certain extent. But if you aim for level 3s, then that's what you should be trying to do. Now, what you get on the application form in section 2 is these 5 competencies that are all sort of written down. And what you have to do is to give some examples of projects that show how you meet each of the criteria. And we talk about providing evidence for each competence. Now, when we say evidence for each competence, what we really mean is telling the assessors what you've actually done. So when we say evidence, we're not looking for proof in this case. The proof of the pudding comes in the actual interview, because you're going to talk about, you're going to be drilled down on various statements that you've made. So you wouldn't write anything on your application form that you can't talk about at the interview. You're looking at about 400 words max for each of these competencies. It is a confidential document, but we wouldn't ask you not to write about anything that is sensitive at all. And you write it in a certain style, which is in the first person. I did, I led, I managed, I solved, whatever it is. First person, past tense. And again, you'll find on that particular link, IMechE.org/application, an exemplar application form, which you'll find an exemplar for CEng, and you'll find an exemplar for IEng. And you'll see the particular narrative style that they're using there. And this is the document that is assessed by the interviewers before your interview. And what we suggest you do is that you choose probably a couple of projects for A and a couple of projects for B at max. You don't have to do 2 on each. You might do 1 on each, but you wouldn't do more than 2 on each probably. And describe what you did. So write statements from a position of strength. What that really means is only write about stuff that you know about. Write about projects that you enjoyed, ones that inspired you and motivated you. Be able to speak about those projects in a sort of quantitative way, talking about, quantitative things, weight, speeds, dimensions, flow rates, all of those sorts of things. Select 1 or 2 challenging projects which demonstrate range and depth and highlight evidence of competence. So again, the projects you're choosing are the ones that really you find inspiring, and write about those in a clear, logical style. What projects would you include in your application? Well, some advice from the assessors on that would be to remember that this is about you. It's about what you've actually done. So they're not interested in, what anybody else did. So I did this, I did that, I led, I managed, I directed, I solved. The I word is one of the most important small words you can ever use in IMechE. It is the most important small word you can use. And sometimes it's difficult to get into the I mentality because, you know, often we're all thinking about, you know, the collective, aren't we? The we did this, we did that. But you've got to try and isolate yourself from it a little bit. So we want to know what you've done, where you've pushed forward the frontiers of knowledge, where you've worked with new technologies and saved money, where you've worked within budgets and timescales, how you were successful. It's all about you. So in this application, there is a need to sort of, you know, put yourself on a pedestal, I suppose. It's not always easy to put yourself on a pedestal, but that's one of the things that you are required to do, really, with this. Now, the other piece of advice is, you know, be disciplined, right? Follow instructions. They want you to have a polished application form. Poorly written application is not the mark of a professional engineer. Check your English and grammar. Get someone to proofread it. Maybe somebody who's not even an engineer, you know, from a sort of sanity check, maybe your partner or a friend or somebody. Does this make sense from a sort of, you know, a language point of view? Clear written communication is a requirement of Competence D. It is possible for people to be marked down on something if it isn't clear. We don't want you to write your job description when you're answering the actual competence questions. You can use section 1 to give background to the job that you do. You know, they're not interested in what you should have done, but only in what you've actually done. So try not to waffle, basically. I mean, when you get to the competence statements, we don't really need too much background, like, you know, this company does this and this market is that and the competitors for this or that. Not interested. Only interested really in what you have done and why and how you did it. That's really important. So, yeah, tell us what you've done, but tell us why you did it and how you did it, because you are the engineer. And this is all about making professional judgments. And what you're saying is, in this application, I am worthy to be a chartered engineer. So I understand the why and the how of the decisions that I made and what lays behind those decisions. Do follow the guidance, describe 2 or 3 projects. I mean, as I say, you can probably do 2 on A and 2 on B, which okay is 4. But that's the sort of number, you know, at least 2. You might go on 1 on competence A and 1 on competence B. But you could do, you know, a couple. But bear in mind, you've only got 400 words on each. So you're not going into a huge amount of detail here. You know, this is quite top line in many ways. And, you know, just doing 2 max will enable you to describe the projects, you know, the level of depth that's needed and stay within the word count. And show you understand the principles and the engineering behind the projects, because this is how the interviewers will see that you are working at the correct level. So, you know, when it gets to the competencies, mention if you've chaired meetings, done presentations, written learned papers. All of this is useful for Competence D. But don't exaggerate your claims, right? Only about what you know and what you can talk about at the interview. Now, again, this is the important thing here, that we can help you write the application form. But the purpose of the assessment is to be able to talk about what you've written on the application form as well. And that's where the interview comes in. And you must be able to justify in the interview any claims that you've made on your application. So if you start talking about a particular project, expect the interviewers to want to go into some depth on that. They're going to say, right, tell me about these carbon fibre fuel valve access panels that you've been doing. Tell me about the FEA analysis that you did on here. Tell me about that testing. What equations did you use? What calculations did you use? Because remember, they're going to have got this application a couple of weeks before, and they're going to formulate in their minds the sorts of questions they want to ask you about. So you just got to be on the ball with your area. So you're not going to be talking about anything that you don't know about. So you shouldn't write and make any claims that you cannot subsequently justify. And what you need to do is to include in the application all really of the 5 competencies. What are they testing here? well, how you identified engineering problems, the technical content, the depth and the breadth of the engineering issues that you were faced with, how you used and developed new technologies. Now, Competence A is about how you've extended your engineering knowledge, how you've extended your engineering knowledge since you graduated. So what engineering principles did you use? How have you extended that knowledge? How have you solved engineering problems? Talk about safety, that's in Competence E. Talk about your level of responsibility. Talk about your budgets, how you and how and what responsibilities you had. All of those things are really important. Now, I want to just look into a little bit of depth at each of these competencies and look at them as they apply to both CEng and IEng. Now, the competencies for CEng and IEng are very, very similar. So there's only actually one word difference between them. So the Competence A for CEng is use a combination of general and specialist engineering knowledge and understanding to optimize the application of existing and emerging technology. And for IEng, it's apply the application of existing and emerging technology. Now you might say, well, what's all that about? What's the difference? Well, let's not get too hung up about that. Essentially, Competence A is about how you are applying your knowledge and understanding. Optimize suggests, I suppose, innovation and creativity to a higher level than somebody who's just applying it. But it's about what have you learned since you left university? What projects have you applied engineering knowledge in? So think about engineering subjects like thermodynamics or stress analysis. Think about any courses that you might have been on, because they are all relevant as well in how you've extended your knowledge. And then apply them to those projects. So sometimes we say to people, there's a subtle distinction between Competence A and Competence B. Competence A is more, I suppose, around the knowledge and understanding bit, and Competence B is more about the practical application and the problem solving. But talk about how you've used and developed emerging technologies, how you've applied your knowledge to the problems that you've had to deal with, developing processes and techniques which enhance productivity and quality, using a sound evidence-based approach to problem solving, how you've used new technologies, new processes, prototype design, all of these sorts of things. But when we run our application workshops, we usually say to people, just think of some projects that you liked doing, get them down, and we'll worry about whether they're Competence A and Competence B a bit later. But if there is a distinction to be made, as I say, Competence A is more about the academic knowledge and how you have extended your knowledge. What has been your specialism? Often a very good way to start Competence A is, since graduating, I have gained in-depth knowledge of using carbon fibre composite materials. The construction of aircraft wings is the opening line of the exemplar for Competence A. So talk about how you've developed that specialism. And you might have a couple of examples of Competence A. You'll also may be aware that each competence is further broken down into sub-competences. You've got A1, A2, B1, B2, B3. Some people like to address each of the sub-competences individually with a paragraph on each, but you don't have to do that. As long as you address the issues behind each of the sub-competences, you don't have to sort of say, this is my answer to A1, this is my answer to A2. And normally, if you're describing a project at which you've developed your engineering knowledge, you will be probably covering competencies A1 and A2. But I would say, keep it simple, keep it as straightforward as possible. Now, Competence B. Excuse me, I'm slurping tea here as well as I go. I do apologise. So Competence B, as it applies to CEng and IEng. Now again, the words in red are the CEng bit. Apply the appropriate theoretical and practical methods to the analysis and solution of engineering problems, full stop. And that's Competence B for CEng. For IEng, the bit in red is actually missed out, and it just goes, apply the appropriate theoretical and practical methods to design, develop, manufacture, construct, commission, operate, etc. Again, let's not dwell too much on the difference between CEng and IEng. It's very, very subtle, but obviously you would see there's more emphasis on problem solving in CEng, whereas in IEng it's more application. What I would say, I mean, many of you probably, some of you are sort of interested in IEng, some of you may be interested in CEng. Obviously, usually the reason why people apply for IEng rather than CEng is not because of the competence, because they're less competent. It's usually because of the academics. We're not going to get into academics here. We're talking about competence. But, you know, what a lot of interview assessors would say is that they would see, and Ian may corroborate this later on, is that they may see at a particular group of interviews, you know, some really good IEng applications from people who would be certainly CEng competent. The reason they've not applied for CEng is because of their academics. So my advice to anybody, to be honest, is apply for the level of registration that you are able to go for at this point in time. Don't delay. So if you are a bachelor's graduate with 4 or 5 years experience and more, okay, you know, your degree may not be equipping you at this stage to apply for CEng, but you can do further learning. You can do something called career learning assessment, which is the subject of our next talk. But in the meantime, you can apply. You can apply for IEng, and applying for IEng is a really good thing to do because it gets you in straight away. Because, you know, you've not got your degree accredited at this point. It might take you a couple of years to get to that point. So why wait when you can get IEng straight away, when you're doing a competent job, when you know, you can answer these questions, you can give examples of projects where you've solved engineering problems, where you've identified improvement possibilities, where you've enhanced products and processes and services, and you seek solutions, and you know, you will all probably, with 4 or 5 years experience, be able to do all these things now. And what we encourage you to do at the IMechE is to apply now and get through this interview process now. Whether it's a CEng application or an IEng application, we can assist you with that. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we can do that in a few minutes. And then you come on to Competence C. These are the softer skills, so it's about leadership for CEng, management for IEng. I won't go into the difference between those, but you know, you don't have to be a line manager to be chartered, but they are looking for you to have a certain level of responsibility. So tell us about the things that make your job responsible. What responsibilities have you been given? So you might not be a line manager, but maybe you're a project manager. You've got some responsibility for some aspect of some project. Tell us about that, because that's what we want to know about. You might not be managing people directly, but you might be managing suppliers. You might be managing contractors. You might, you know, and often managing people that who don't report to you sometimes is even trickier than people who do report to you, because you can't necessarily tell them what to do. So if you're in some sort of supervisory role, if you're managing a project, if you're responsible for budgets, managing projects to time, cost and scope, leading teams, exploiting resources, so you might have human resources at your disposal, or capital resources, or revenue resources, or budgets, or something like that. You know, if you're doing that sort of thing, that's likely to be an important role, and you've got to sort of, you know, focus on that. If you're doing things like planning shutdowns and outages, setting budgets, all of that, mention it, because it's all relevant. And then there's Competence D, which is about communication and interpersonal skills. Touched on this a bit earlier. Make sure that your application is well written, is proof checked. Obviously, keep within the word count. It's a good measure of your written communication skills, your application form, and the interview is a good measure of your verbal communication skills. But tell us about other ways in which you've communicated. Tell us about things that you've done, papers that you've given, presentations that you've made? How do you communicate at work? Do you attend meetings? Do you present ideas at meetings? How have you been able to get the company to buy into your way of doing things? Maybe you do tender documentation, maybe you write technical specifications. All of these things would all be examples of communication. And you should really sort of, talk about those, talk about meetings with clients, talk about the way that you interact with others. If you're managing suppliers and contractors, how do you communicate with them? If you're a consultant, communication with customers and all of those sorts of things. And then it comes on to Competence E. Now, Competence E has different components to it, but it's more of a commitment than a competence. So it's a commitment to the code of conduct. And there are sort of 5 different bits to this. It starts off with the code of conduct, which is E1. So you need to have read the code of conduct and make a statement you will abide by it. It talks about things like honesty and integrity, accuracy and rigor, that sort of thing. So you would always start this with a statement that says, I have read and will abide by the IMechE code of conduct. Mention any other codes of conduct that you abide by as well. E2 is about health and safety, and I've not yet come across an engineer who hasn't yet got safety at the very core of everything that they do. So talk about how safety and keeping safe impacts on you. And then we have E3, which is about sustainability. How are you doing your engineering activities in a way that enhances the planet? I mean, and sustainability has been in Competence E for at least 15 years, well before sustainability was as fashionable as a word and a concept as it is now. So it's really important that you're able to sort of talk about how you are doing your engineering activities in a green way. Some of you may be at the cutting edge of green technologies anyway, but talk about how that side of things impacts upon the decisions that you are making. And then you've got CPD, which is about continuing professional development, how you are keeping up to date. And of course, every member of the IMechE is required to keep up to date and to record their development. So CPD can take many forms. You just need a section in here to say what you're doing in terms of keeping your CPD up to date, what sort of courses you're going on. And it's not just about courses, it's about external activities as well. Going into schools, being a mentor, encouraging others about the engineering profession. All of those sorts of things would be relevant. And indeed being involved with the IMechE and its local committees. So, the IMechE thrives on its members doing things together. And of course, that's been hit a little bit, well, a lot, because of what's happening in the world. But, those geographical groups, the IMechE's local areas and committees are really what it's about for a lot of members. It's about engineers coming together, supporting each other, and helping each other. We're having to find other ways of doing it, of course, this is an example. I mean, the North East region would normally put on events for people to come to physically. Today, of course, we're doing it this way, and I guess we've got people from a lot further afield than the North East. We've got 300 people on here, and it's put on by people like Andy and Ian, volunteers who come and do these things because they care about engineering. So if you are doing things like that, if you're involved with an IMechE and its local committees, and or you're doing mentoring, or you're a STEM ambassador, all of that sort of thing would be relevant. And you can talk about this at your interview as well. And there's lots of volunteer roles in the IMechE. If you have a look at imeche.org/volunteering, you'll see a whole host of things there that you can get involved in, from very local things, regional interview assessors. You can get involved with your committee, regional chairman, mentors, STEM ambassadors, even taking a part in the sort of national governance of the institution. And then ethics, well, that's E5. So how are you doing things in an ethical way? Honesty, integrity, accuracy and rigour, respect for the law, life and the public good. Talk about how ethics are important to you. You will be asked about this. You will be asked at the interview, have you read the code of conduct? And the answer, by the way, folks, to that question, believe it or not, is yes. You have. Make sure that you do, and also make sure that you can follow up on the supplementary question, which is, well, how do you think it appeals? It applies to you? What particular aspects of the code of conduct are important for you? Ian will corroborate, no doubt, if that's what they're asking you about ethics and codes of conduct. But you know, make sure you've read the code of conduct. And if you've got examples of ethical behaviour, you know, the book stops with you. Have you ever refused to sign something off because it's not been correct in your view? Think about some of the scandals, emission rigging, that sort of thing. You know, the book stops with you. And, you know, as a professional engineer, you may have to take decisions like that. And a few more examples are Competence E. I'm not going to go through all of those, but you know, those are the sorts of things, volunteer activities, health and safety representatives, that sort of thing that Competence E is going to be looking at. Just finishing off this application form. So that then is step 2. And by the way, folks, we can help you with this, and we're very keen to help you. So of the 300 of you who are on this call today, I wonder how many of you are you know, fairly close to writing your application forms. Well, if you are, there's lots of help we can give. So everybody can get free feedback on their application forms. And we also, my colleagues and I run these professional review professional events, application workshops, where we help people complete the application forms. I run one where I help people do it on a single day. The next one is on the 21st of October. You find details of all these on our website at imeche.org/workshops. You need to book onto them, but we help you identify projects. We help you, even if you've not even thought of any yet and you've got a blank sheet of paper, you can register for an application workshop. All we ask is that you're ready to apply and that you've got the accredited qualification for IEng or CEng, and you've got the relevant experience, and you can come on the virtual course, and we help you write the forms, and we help you in particular with that section 2 competence section that I've just looked at. So section 3 is the organisational chart. So you have to include an organisational chart showing who you report to, who reports to you. Are any of these CEng or IEng already? And that's just an A4 sheet that you upload onto that. And then your development action plan, short, medium and long-term career, objectives, 150 words. Remember, CPD isn't just training courses. So remember that external stuff, volunteering stuff that I'm mentioning, all of that counts as CPD as well, and you should mention it. Even stuff that you're not necessarily related to engineering, you can put on there. Being active in society. Maybe you're a school governor or a chairman of your local sports club or a parish councillor or whatever. It shows an interest in society, and whilst that's you need to put more than just that in. It all helps when you have your interview. And your sponsors, you do need 2 sponsors. One must be registered to at least the equivalent level of your application. So if you're going for CEng, you need a CEng sponsor. If you're going for IEng, you can have an IEng or a CEng sponsor. And they can be from any engineering institution. And really, the requirement of the sponsor is really just to verify that you are a fit and proper person to be a chartered or an incorporated engineer. There isn't a big bureaucratic requirement for them to do very much. They should check your application, they should help you and assist you, but they don't have to write a report on you. And if you use the online application process, they don't even have to sign their name, they just have to agree to sponsor you, and the IMechE will then contact them by email just to check and verify that they are happy to do that. Now, this, of course, then it takes us to the interview. Now, as I say, the person with the experience here I'm going to hand over to soon is Ian. But before we get to that point, I just want to make a few general observations. And this photograph was taken in those good old days when people sat in a room together. And as I say, we're trying to replicate that as closely as possible in the virtual world. So on the left is the interview chairman and the co-panelist. And those are the people who ask the questions. And the person at the end of the table is the interview facilitator. So that's Ian. No, well, that's not Ian, but that is Ian's colleague. That particular photograph is taken in London at the IMechE HQ. And this, so that's the setup in terms of what it looks like, and that is now reflected online. So you get these chairman and co-panelist. One will be a fellow, one may, well, they might both be fellows. The interview facilitator, the Ian person, their job is to facilitate the interview, meet and brief the applicant. That still happens, even though it's all happening online, and normally you sort of take them into a room and say hello. It all happens remotely. Their job is to ensure that the standards are maintained, that the interview is fair, and all the paperwork is sent back to the HQ afterwards. And that's all gone into this sort of virtual world where now you get this on Microsoft Teams on a 4-way video conference. There's a member of the membership team who conducts an initial test, and you can submit additional documentation up to 2 days before, and that's because we always ask. We used to sort of say, you want to take something into the interview, you can do that. Something physical. Might be a might be a photograph or a drawing or sample or something like that. Often it helps if you've got something to show people, and we still allow you to do that. You use a laptop, iPad or a desktop computer on Microsoft Teams, and you will need to provide ID on the day, because we can't be. Got to make sure that the people that we are interviewing are the people that we think they are. This question about what you can and can't talk about, don't talk about anything too sensitive. Speak to your boss or any CEngers within your organisation. If you've got any doubts about what you should talk about, and if there's sometimes technical issues, pause and clearly tell the panel. I'm going to let Ian speak more about this because I've not actually been in a virtual interview, so he'll probably have a lot more to say about it. But it is an opportunity for a business discussion with your senior peers. It is informal, for 45 to 60 minutes. Talk about the things that you've got on your application form. Bring that application form to life. The panel members are trying to assist you to get the most out of it, and I suppose sometimes people, might put in an application form that isn't great, but the interviewers can probably drag out of them the relevant information to make a good application, and the interview sort of pulls them through it. But it can also work the other way. You might get a great application form, but if you can't, if you dry up or you can't discuss and justify the things that you've written, then you could potentially, go the wrong way. And the panel will have reviewed your form, and all the questions will be related to your application. So the interview facilitator is going to be there. The interview facilitator will describe the format of the interview. It will remind you to use the first person I. So just as I said earlier, use I in your application form, so you should use it too in the interview. But only the chair and the co-panelists will ask you questions. Commercial sensitivity will be respected, but if you don't want anyone to know about anything, don't say anything. And of course, it is very possible to write applications in a very general way. which is not giving away anything sensitive. So speak in general terms. We're not expecting you to tell us what the product was or anything commercially sensitive. And you'll start off by giving a brief introduction of yourself. So tell us about yourself is often what is said first of all. And the content of the application form will form the basis of the questions. You will be asked to talk about certain aspects of the projects. Tell me about this. What part did you find the most challenging? What would you do differently next time? How did that reward and satisfy you? It's a discussion amongst peers. It's not a presentation. You're not taking your laptop in there. You're not allowed. Well, you're not taking anything in there because you're not going in there. But it's not a PowerPoint presentation. It's a talk. It's a chat, and they will probably ask you to expand on certain bits of your application. That's when it might be a good idea to show sketches, calculations to illustrate your point. And those are the things that you can submit quite late in the day, just before your interview, just as you would, if you're going to a physical interview, you might take something with you, and this enables you to do that in the same way. And then they'll spend 10 minutes at least on Competence E. So have this understanding of the code of conduct and awareness of how it relates to your work. You should also have an awareness of any legislation that you might be bound by for work, so any codes of conduct and practice that you work to, any environmental standards that you work to, that sort of thing. Your development action plan, they'll also spend 5 minutes on, showing that you've got a plan to CPD going forward. So, have some good ideas in there. Talk about what you might like to do after you've been chartered. Talk about what you want to do. I want to be a mentor. I'm interested in possibly being an interview assessor. I'd like to get involved with my IMechE local committee. Even if you've not done these things up to now, there's absolutely no reason why you can't have an ambition to do them. And at the end of the interview, you'll be asked about anything that hasn't been covered. So, sometimes you might think, oh, I wish you'd asked me that question. Well, that's your opportunity. So there is something that you wanted to say that you hadn't said, then that's your opportunity to do that. It's about you. We've said it's 45 to 60 minutes, and they're looking for 2 2s and 3 3s. Answer the questions, have supporting information which is submitted to them a couple of days in advance. Don't think you can work from a script. Be natural, I think, is what it's about. And there are no trick questions. They're testing you on UK spec and how these projects that you do demonstrate UK spec competence. Okay. You don't get your results on the day, by the way. The interview panel make a recommendation. It goes to what's called a professional review committee, and they have to verify everything. And you then hopefully are successfully elected. And if you're not successful, and by the way, the application pass rate is about 95%, so most people do. And the reason it's high is because we can help you and give you feedback, and that's why I will always advise people to do that. And the last thing you do is to submit your application form using this online application process. Okay, so I think before I think Ian's next. Let's go back. Before I introduce Ian, I hope that's giving you a bit of a flavour for the whole application and attending the interview. As I say, if you're ready to write your application form, go and do it, and either send us a copy of it on email. That's my email address there, and we can get you some free objective written feedback on it. Complete the application form as fully as you possibly can. Alternatively, or as well as, you can attend one of our application workshops. As I say, I do these. I run them for 5 hours on a particular day, and we start with a blank sheet of paper, and by the end of the day we've got something that most people have written down. We give you a one-to-one discussion the following day, just helping you refine what you've written down, and we get you into a sort of application process, which results in an interview being held on a certain day, and your outcome on a certain day as well. So I think you should do yourselves a favour and get yourselves sorted out for a 2021 election to CEng or IEng, and have a look and see what we've got in the autumn. Send your applications to me, and why don't you set yourself a goal of getting your application written, by, I say, sort of end of November or whatever, or middle of November, and get your application in before Christmas, and let's get you charter incorporated in 2021. Right, I'm now going to shut up and hand over to my esteemed colleague, Ian Mearns, CEng IMechE Interview Facilitator. Ian's a great track record at Caterpillar, as well as his experience as an interview facilitator. So without further ado, Ian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dennis, and hello everybody. As Dennis said, I'm Ian Mearns, an interview facilitator. What I'm about to say is predominantly going to complement what Dennis has said, and perhaps add some actual insight into what actually goes on at interviews, and in the so doing, hopefully it should help all of you with your applications. Just to give you a bit more background, I was actually a co-panelist and then a chair before coming a facilitator. I've been involved with this process now for over 10 years. And I was actually part of a pilot group of interview facilitators to help get the virtual PRI process up and running as well, about half a dozen of us. As Dennis has said, this is aimed at incorporated and chartered, people becoming incorporated and chartered at member level. Something that's worth remembering is that if there are any potential fellow applicants out there as well, direct entry fellow, they would have to go through the same process as well, fundamentally. And one of my additional roles, volunteer roles with the IMechE, is an industrial advisor, advising on fellow applications. So if there are any of those out there, please ask questions as well. The primary role of a facilitator is fairness. Somebody who is there, who knows the process, who knows the system, and ensures that the chair and co-panelists treat you fairly. A facilitator can intervene if necessary, but I must stress it is extremely rare for that to occur, that the panelists are very well trained and screened as well. However, the facilitator's role is that, and of course to ensure that the interview is conducted to the proper standard of the IMechE. I've broken this short presentation down into three simple areas: preparation, the virtual interview, in particular general etiquette, and advice for the actual interview itself. So for preparation, as mentioned already, you need to have some photo ID ready and available. That helps to get things off to a good start. We wouldn't want to have to go through an interview and then without the photo ID. What would happen in that instance would be, we'd still go ahead, we'd make a note of who you are and ask you to send your ID to headquarters afterwards, and then sent on to a facilitator who would double check that it was the actual person who turned up. All that does for you is delay the process. So Have it handy, please. As Denis has said already, please remember this interview is about yourself. It is not about the team in which you work. Quite simply, it's not the team that is presenting themselves for becoming incorporated or chartered. It's your good selves. So we need to know your specific contribution. And what advice I always give to any candidate who's looking perhaps a little apprehensive and maybe not too keen to say what I did and all that, I just simply say, just go in there and show off. It's about you. It's not about what other people did. And be prepared to give examples with your answers, because at the end of the day, it's a competency-based interview. The panel are looking for evidence, specific evidence to support their scores. So no general answers, really, please. We need actual evidence. Have a clear understanding of the code of conduct and ethics. It sounds a statement of the obvious. Vast majority of people do, in my experience. However, some people don't. There was an example of somebody who'd been through the MPDS scheme, the Monitored Professional Development Scheme. And when it came to the code of conduct, they didn't have a clue, surprising though it sounds. We even turned the question round, other than saying, well, have you read the code of conduct? We turned it round and saying, well, what's your understanding of it? If you were going to write one for a professional engineer, what sort of things do you think they would have in it? No idea. So really, make sure you've got that. And in that particular instance, the MPDS mentor, quite frankly, hadn't done their role properly. They hadn't followed through something such as that. Have clear examples on how you've considered sustainability as well. You may almost take it for granted in a way, but don't, because as I say, you have to state what you think might be the obvious to you, because it's an interview. We need to know what your actual experience is. Some candidates think sustainability is just financial sustainability at an interview, and don't seem to be aware that we're really also talking, and primarily talking about in this instance, environmental sustainability. So that's worth bearing in mind as well. Safety, underlined in red, paramount of course. And you need to have clear examples of how you've considered safety. And please don't just say things like, I always ensure that I wear personal protective equipment when going onto the shop floor. Of course that's important, but we're looking for something above that as well. How do you ensure that what you have designed or what you have manufactured is safe? That's the sort of question that candidates are given, and it's important that you're prepared for that. If you're sharing information, obviously you have it ready. As Denis has already said, you can present that a day or two beforehand through IMechE headquarters, who will then forward it on to the interview team, and they can have that and will have that on their computers that they can refer to, and you can refer to it in that manner. In addition to that, you could actually hold something up to the camera, a small object. Could be a model of what you've designed or manufactured, or if it's small enough, the actual component. So that's another way of showing it. We even have a situation where on the morning of the interview, a candidate said, "Oh, I wish I'd sent this a day or two ago. I just remembered it this morning." Well, don't be shy. Bring it forward. It'll be at the discretion of the chair, but they normally say yes, unless it's too large. So you can bring something in effectively on the day and share it from your screen. The thing we do not allow are full-blown PowerPoint presentations, but an image or two, a diagram, a picture worth 1,000 words normally, copy of a calculation. They do help to set the scene, and in fact it can help to save time as well. Time's precious. You'd be surprised how quickly it goes by in an interview. It's also useful, it's not mandatory I would suggest, but it's also useful to have a copy of the application by your side. And additionally, some candidates choose to have an aid memoir as well. That's the sort of thing that could come up towards the end of an interview, where you're asked if there's anything at the end of the interview. Is there anything you wish to add that hasn't been covered but you think may be helpful to your application? You don't feel obliged to answer it. If the panel don't read anything into it one way or the other, where you provide additional information at the end or not. Similarly, they don't read anything into it whether you wish to share information or not. My experience is about 50% of candidates wish to share and the others don't. And they're not marked down on it. The point is, it's your interview, it's your day. We want to give you every possible opportunity of getting all the points across that you wish to get across. So having something like a simple aid memoir will help you as well to make sure that you have got all your points across. Continual professional development and development action plan. Denis has already covered that. What we ideally look for is not the fact that you keep a log of your training, but how, for example, your professional development plan can help to complement your career aspirations. You may wish to become chief engineer or more senior in your role. So what sort of courses are you planning, as well as those that you have actually undertaken? That's how continual professional development and your development action plan actually link very usefully together. And remember, continual professional development is mandatory for everybody registered with the institution. It is mandatory, and people are being audited on it. So we all have to keep up to date. We're all being audited. You've got your sponsors, and thank you very much for sponsors who actually go ahead and adopt that responsibility, as it were. However, you can use them to have a practice interview. I would suggest that wherever possible you have a practice interview before you turn up on the day. If nothing else, it will show you how quickly your 45 minutes goes by. I'm at the end of each interview, where I debrief candidates, and I've debriefed, as you know, hundreds of them now. They nearly all say, "My goodness, Ian, that flew past. Where did it go?" Oh, have a practice. Come up with clear, succinct answers. It's in your own interests to do so, because you don't want to waste time, and you want to use your time efficiently to get all your points across. And there are a lot of points to get across. Don't try and beat yourself up during an interview and say, "Oh, they didn't ask me about this and they didn't ask me about that." The whole interview process is to take both your written application and the actual verbal interview into account as an entity. So, but even so, practice helps to get you through the interview efficiently. Sounds mundane, but please have a glass of water handy, because after all, you're going to be doing the vast majority of the talking, and nobody wants to literally dry up. Moving on to general etiquette for an interview. Some of it may well be stating the obvious, some of it may not, we should say. Ensure you've got a quiet area away from unnecessary distractions. That's pretty well straightforward, isn't it? Ensure you've got good connections well before the interview. Now, one good way is to check if anybody else is likely to use the internet at home or in your office at the same time as your interview, and ask them to keep that to a minimum if possible. You can always request for the connections to be tested. Don't underestimate the importance of that, because we all want things to run smoothly on the day. Adjust the room background. Well, that's pretty straightforward as long as it's clean and tidy. Remember, it's a professional interview, it's a professional body, so we'd expect that. I've never seen any issues so far, and I have actually done 14 virtual reviews now as a facilitator, and they've all been fine. The room lighting, a little bit of a subtle one. Sometimes one side of a face can't be seen, so try and experiment beforehand or with a connectivity check to get that right. Even more subtle things, I've seen a situation where a check was conducted at one time of the day, and the actual interview was in the mid-afternoon when the sun had moved round, and the candidate had to briefly get up and adjust the blinds. That's not a big deal, but you know, who wants to have their interview interrupted at all? Ensure that all phones are muted and off. Please remember, if you're being interviewed from your office or your home office, it's not just your mobile, but your landline as well. Consider the possibility of background noises. That's simple things of work and dogs and things like that. Try and see if you can make arrangements for that not to happen. As far as the panel is concerned, we would always use a mute button when we're not talking, in order to minimize background noise as well. Please keep your camera switched on as well. It's easy to momentarily switch it off. And it goes without saying, look smart and professional. After all, it is an interview for a professional body. You may be working at home. At the minimum, we would request smart casual. Right, so moving on, advice for the actual interview itself. Don't be concerned if the panel do not come from the same engineering background as yourself. You'd be surprised how often candidates ask that question before an interview, and they seem slightly concerned whether or not they're from the same background. Well, invariably they're not. It would be virtually on a practical impossibility with the wide spectrum of backgrounds and industries, albeit engineering, that we interview people from. It would be virtually impossible to get a chair and a co-panelist with specific, clear, or directly relevant experience. However, that's not needed. As Denis has already said, At times you can talk in general engineering terms, and please describe your role in general engineering terms, but in clear engineering terms when we start drilling down to application of principles. And in so doing, whilst you're describing your sector to somebody who does not work in that sector, in so doing you will help to demonstrate your communication skills. It would help with Competency D. Panels are experienced in interviewing applicants from a wide variety of backgrounds and will adjust their questions accordingly. Within part of the interviewer training, reference is made to a list of competency profiles that the IMechE use for training purposes, and that allows the type of questioning to be geared to the type of role that you're undertaking. Not everybody designs equipment. Some manufacture them as their role. Some maintain them. Some are from academia. Some are consultants. And some are project engineers. So questions will be geared around the type of role that you undertake. Again, complementing what Denis has just said, please don't spend too much time talking in general terms about your sector and company products. By all means, refer to them. The panel are interested to know the sector in which you're working, but remember, they're interested really in your actual role. And again, please always give clear, succinct answers. Quite a number of times we've come across candidates who start repeating answers, verging on rambling on, and that just wastes your time. Your time is precious. Your 45 minutes, or it could extend up to 60, but the minimum of 45, and that will go very quickly. So, with clear, specific answers. Oh, and other words to please try and avoid, if you possibly can, is the A's. I mean, what does that really mean? Does it mean that you're managing different departments and people? Are you giving engineering advice to them? It's a word to avoid, and you need to be more specific. It's what you actually do that counts. Talking about what you actually do that counts, I mentioned the wide spectrum of backgrounds that we get. I'll expand a bit further, not just in the Northeast, but nationally now, that I'm being involved nationally now with these interviews, but certainly in the Northeast, we have them from the nuclear industry, petrochemical, offshore, manufacturing, academia, and we still get some from steel production as well, which is, albeit rather limited these days, it's still there. The point is a very, very wide spectrum. We also get quite a number of project engineers. That's a role that does vary, very wide spectrum. Some project engineers have moved on beyond, how can I call it, hands-on, doing their own calculations type design work and into more of a managerial responsibility. But we would always expect such people still to be able to explain in engineering terms the product that's actually being developed and designed, developed and produced. And now moving on to my last slide. Again, it's something we've touched on already, but if a subject is confidential or potentially patentable to a company, please don't try and hide behind that. explain in general engineering terms, fundamental engineering terms, how you are applying your engineering without giving away actual confidential details. We're not interested in them. We do have people from companies that supply the MOD, for example. We have people who design and manufacture items for nuclear submarines. It's still possible to explain how they've designed a piece of pipework, taken vibration and stressing into consideration, flow rates, pressure drops, testing and whatever, without revealing the specifics of what they're used for. We're not interested. And panels can be a little bit suspicious if candidates try and rely on things like, well, that's confidential, that's confidential. We'll just come back and say, well, that's understood. We're not interested in the confidential aspects. Just explain in clear, simple, fundamental engineering principles that you're applying. And I mentioned before, if you wish to add information during a wrap-up session, which you will be offered at the end of an interview, and it's not mandatory for you to accept it, or it's up to you. This is where your aide memoir can help to make sure you get all your points across that you wish on your interview. Oh, that's just another thing, job titles. When it comes down to it, they don't really mean very much. It's what you do that counts. That's what the panel are interested in. A senior engineer in one company doesn't mean the same thing in another company. I worked for a company for a long while where they had what were called technical stewards. That's an American company. And people in Britain, interviewers in Britain, didn't understand what that was, and it happened to be more of a technical manager. So when you're referring to your job title, just go, it's really what you actually do that counts, in your actual responsibility that counts. Now this is one we come across quite often. We have people who do not have a budget and are not responsible for managing teams, but they do show technical leadership. So if you're in a position where you have neither a budget or a team, please bring along to the interview examples of where you have shown technical leadership, where you have swayed a company from moving down one technical route to another based on your skill and knowledge and expertise. Also, in so doing, it's worthwhile having at least an approximate idea of the value of the projects and products on which you give technical advice. Some people don't realize at times that how important their advice is, and when prompted, some applicants end up with coming up with values which they're quite significant, and that is technical leadership. Another form of technical leadership as well is specifying testing and interpreting the results and providing advice accordingly. So that's another form of technical leadership as well. Right, so essentially that's what I had to say. Final comments: be well prepared, and of course good luck. And if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to field them now. So thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Ian. That was very helpful. Now, it's hard to get questions in 300 people, but I don't know, Andy, are you been monitoring the chat, and do you have any questions that have come in that you're aware of?
Yes, we've got quite a few, so thank you for your presentations, Dennis and Ian. A couple of people have asked about getting a copy of the slides. The whole webinar session has been recorded, and that will be sent out to everyone who pre-registered within the next 7 working days. So hopefully that allows everyone to get access to the slides.
Great.
So I'll run through the comments. There is quite a few of them, guys, so we'll have to try and be reasonably quick in our answers. The first one's probably for Ian. What is the latest UK spec, and where could somebody find that?
I didn't quite catch all the question.
We've got some interference then.
Okay. I think it was, what is the UK spec? Is that right?
Yes, and where could somebody find that?
What is the UK spec? Is that the question?
Yes.
The UK spec is the UK standard for professional engineering competence. It is, if you want, I mean, if you download the IMechE application form, it's all on there. But if you wanted to get it directly from the Engineering Council, it's available at www.engc.org.uk. engc.org.uk. That is the standard. It is the Engineering Council's framework document for the whole process. So anybody who wants to apply for CEng or IEng is examined and assessed in line with the UK spec. So that's what the UK spec is, and you definitely need to be familiar with it before you apply.
Okay, Dennis. The next question: what is the minimum number of years required to apply for chartership?
We would suggest. Sorry.
Carry on, Dennis. Carry on.
Well, in a single word, I would say 4. 4 years postgraduate experience. That's as a general rule. Technically speaking, there is no minimum. You can apply when you like, but it's quite possible that if you apply too quickly, an assessor might think that you are not ready. You need to be very, very good, for example, if you were to put in an application after only 2 years. So my advice would be minimum of 4 years.
Thank you.
I would also say that when it comes to the interviews, the panel really don't take, obviously, age at all into account or number of years experience. It's simply how they meet the competencies. That's all they go by.
Okay, Dennis, there's a question regarding feedback on the application from the IMechE and how that's accessed. Is that by an email to yourself?
If somebody wants feedback on their application, they complete the PDF of the application form, which you can find at imeche.org/application, and then just put it on an email and send it to me at my email address, which I'm going to put back onto the screen, denis.healy@imeche.org. And get your application written as fairly complete as you can, with all sections completed. We don't need the sponsors bit at this stage, but try and answer the questions as fully as you can with examples of your projects. Attach that form to an email and send it to me, and we'll get you some free objective written feedback from one of our professional development consultants. We'll give you written feedback on every aspect of your application, and I'll go through each section and give you feedback on each of the answers that you've given. I also can recommend these application workshops as well, which you'll find at imeche.org/workshops, and I'm running one on the 21st of October, which is a full day session, or 10 till 3, where we help you complete your application in a single day.
Okay, Dennis, next question. Can the organisational chart be anonymous and only include the job titles of people in my reporting structure?
Yes, absolutely. We don't need people's names.
Yep.
Okay, this one's perhaps for Ian. So someone's written, as an experienced older engineer, would you be asked why you haven't applied for CEng, IEng in the past, and how would you perhaps answer that question?
Well, first of all, you'd never be asked that question. Quite simply, as far as the institution's concerned and the panel therefore is concerned, if somebody applies when they feel it is the right time for them to apply. They take no account of how long they've been being an engineer or their age. It's purely you apply when you feel it is right for you, and that it really is as simple as that.
Okay, thank you, Ian. A couple of people have asked a little bit about timescales from submitting a completed application form to going through the interview process and hopefully being granted chartered or IEng status. How long does that typically take at the moment?
I can answer. By the way, on Ian's answer, the guy got in touch with me last year. He was 85. He wanted to apply for our CEng. I said, why do you want to do that? He said, because I want to have it on my headstone when I go. He said it's been an ambition all my life to do it, and I just want to do it. And even though he was retired, he could still demonstrate that he was keeping his CPD up to date. So a little while it wrote. So the question then was, how long does it take? Well, in normal times, I would say from the point at which you submit your application form to getting an outcome, it normally takes about 3 months. But I have to say that has been that is not happening at the moment because of the situation that we are in. Because of it takes longer to interview people online, and there's been a bit of a backlog. So things are sort of building up a little bit. If you were to apply now, I mean, you're going to get your outcomes in early next year. So I think my advice to you would be: the sooner you get your application form in, the sooner you'll get an interview, and the sooner you'll get a result. But I think you should be thinking in broad terms of at least 4 months or something like that at the current situation. But we're getting through them as quickly as we possibly can, and I think under the circumstances, the IMechE has done incredibly well to keep it going and to deal with the backlog that it's got.
Okay, thank you. We'll try and do a couple more quick questions. Somebody's asked if they have to present their CPD record during the interview.
You don't have to present your CPD record during the interview. You would obviously allude to the fact that you're doing CPD, but it's not necessary to present every last detail of the CPD record, I would say.
Yeah, I would concur with that, Dennis. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ian. In terms of what you've presented today, somebody's asking, are there any differences if you're going down the MPDS route to application?
A good question. The answer really is no. Everybody now applies for CEng in exactly the same way. They all complete the standard application form. The benefit of MPDS for developing engineers in their first 4 years is that they've got a mentor, they're writing it down, they're keeping records, and those records and the quarterly reports are there for them to access when they come to complete their application form. But they can use those reports to copy and paste into a standard application form. But the process of applying is the same. In fact, Ian, you might want to comment. Do the assessors know whether somebody is applying via the MPDS or not when they're interviewed? What's
Yeah.
the score with that?
Yes, they do actually. It comes through on the interview schedule whether it's been a traditional route or MPDS. However, as you rightly say, the application form is now identical, and if it is MPDS, the panel do not have access to previous reports and quarterly reports and annual reports. As you rightly said, all those reports effectively are pointing you in the direction of writing your application form.
Yeah, the reports are between you and your mentor. The IMechE do not see them. They used to see them a few years ago. They used to have to submit them. But now the reports are solely for the purposes of your mentoring helping you and for you.
I'm not sure if Dennis got cut off there. Somebody's asking about in-person interviews, Ian. Do you think they're not likely to come back soon? I wouldn't have thought.
Well, IMechE headquarters have made no statement on this at the moment, but for the foreseeable future, it's all virtual. All of mine, certainly to the end of this year, are virtual. I know that. So that's really as much as I can say at the moment.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do one final question, which probably suits you quite well, Ian. What's the first question usually asked after the introductions during the professional interview?
That tends to vary depending upon the chair, but more often than not, it's something along the lines of, can you tell me about a current project that you are working upon? Or expand more on your current role, but it's predominantly expand more on what you are currently, a project you are currently working on. And that acts as a good icebreaker, because it's something topical. There's something that the candidate's obviously working on and knowledgeable about. And to be honest, depending how that question's answered, you cannot get aspects of A, B, C, D, and E included in it. Not that we're saying we cover all competencies with one question, but it depends. But essentially, something along those lines is normally a good icebreaker.
Okay, thank you. Okay, it's 6 o'clock, everybody. We'll bring tonight's session to a close. There's a couple of people asked quite kind of specific questions about their own applications. I suggest if you forward them to Dennis after the session, he'll get back in touch and give you a more detailed answer regarding your individual circumstances. So thank you very much for joining. Just like to say thanks to Fiona at HQ who's set all this up for us, and thanks again to Dennis and to Ian for their presentations and their insights. So have a good night, everybody. Thank you.